Welcome to the Kit Kat Club and our discussion, do we understand religion and does it matter? My name is Rosie Dawson, and as a freelance religion journalist working for the Religion Media Centre, I suppose it's clear what my position on this question is. I may not always understand religion, but I certainly believe it matters. I'm just going to do a quick plug for the Religion Media Centre if you don't know it. It's an independent, impartial organisation which helps journalists in their reporting of religion. Now, for the next hour or so, I hope we're going to explore with my panel why it matters. I hope that's going to be a space where everyone can feel they're able to ask questions, make comments and contribute. And we've got a great quiz, which I think should be quite fun, which will get us started. But I'm going to introduce our panel first of all. Rachael Maskell is MP for York Central. She's someone who journeys with faith through life, she says, champions links with the faith communities of York and beyond. She's active in Christians in Parliament in Westminster and in a local church in the city. Colin Lewisohn is from the York Humanist network. He believes in cooperation and in dogs. His dog looks very like mine. He's worried that he might be a bit of a Daniels in the lion's den. I'm not sure about that. Professor Pauline Kollantai is the Professor Emerita of Higher Education in Theology and Religious Studies at York St John University, with qualifications in the disciplines of Peace Studies and Theology and Religious Studies. And she's Jewish. And the Dean of York is the very Reverend Dominic Barrington. He began his ministry as a curate in the Diocese of Southwark, has served as a university chaplain in Durham, and was Dean of St James Cathedral, Chicago, before coming to York Minster last year. Now, I'm going to assume that Dominic and Pauline think that understanding religion matters, otherwise I'd wonder what they were doing in their jobs. But, Colin, do you think understanding religion matters, and why?
Of course it matters. Understanding matters, whether it's be religion or whether it be anything else. But religion has played an enormous role and still does in the way how our societies have been constructed throughout history and now. So, of course, understanding religion matters hugely, I would say. I'll save more for later, but of course it matters.
And Rachael, does understanding religion matter? Why?
It really does matter, and through life it's so important that we learn to listen and to respect and to understand, even if we don't share that same faith that somebody else has got. We've all got different things that we believe in, and obviously for some, having a relationship with God, as I do as a Christian, that's really important to me. And for other people, they will have other faiths. But I think it's when we learn to really engage with one another that we learn about each other's journeys.
Right, now we've got a quiz. So if you can scan this code, there are some questions for you to answer. Where there is a right answer, please do resist any temptation to Google search it, but there's only a right answer for a couple of these. And the first question that we're going to ask is where you get most of your information about religion and religious issues from. Are you able to, I've always wanted to say fingers on the buzzer. Are you able to key in your answer now? And hopefully the answers are going to come up on this screen behind us. Dominic, where do you get most of your news about religion from?
My news about religion.
Your news, all your views. Yeah, no, let's have your news, actually. Let's have your news about religion. Information about religion.
Well, I think I get most of my... Right, you keep changing the question. So,
sorry.
I'm happy to answer each one of the questions you ask, but they are different. I get a lot of my news about religion from the BBC News and The Guardian and such like, because actually religion is behind a lot of major global major news stories around the world. Being professionally religious, I also get it from what you might call the trade press, but that's kind of a boring answer. I got a lot of my information about it because I've got a degree in theology, so I'm clearly an outlier in that sense. But I think the key point I want to make in answering this question is that when we read the news, religion is behind a lot of major stories that we read, whether that is articulated or not.
Do you think it's articulated enough?
No, I don't think it is. But a lot of stories around, I mean, particularly around war and conflict, have religion at the heart of them. That's not entirely untrue with what's going on in Ukraine, for instance. And I don't think that that's articulated enough, because there's a shocking lack of religious literacy in the world at large, and with journalists and the press and the media.
Pauline, I mean, you spend your life working on this, but so I don't know, asking about where you get your information about religion from. It's not where most of us are going to get our information about religion from, probably. But what news do you follow?
Well, actually, you're slightly wrong, because I don't just depend on academic texts, because my area, religion, peace and conflict and human rights, is very much that I need to watch daily news. I watch BBC News, Sky News, Al Jazeera. I also get media reports coming to me from different media sources across the world. And I look at NGOs or voluntary organisations, whatever context I focus on. So I would not encourage people just to look at one source only.
Can we have the answer to this question and see what people here say? And if anybody wants to ask for the microphone and make a comment about this. Right, traditional media. Oh, that's interesting. 33 and 33% other. Faith group, family and friends, social media. Okay, is there anyone who pushed the other button who could tell us what that other is? Did anyone say, I get my information about religion from something other than the family, friends, traditional media, social media, school, religious education and faith group?
So my name's Mark Robinson, and I do your own research. I mean, it is massively important whether you're religious or not. It affects everything in the world, one way or another, for good or bad. And I think, if you care about society, you've got to understand it. So reading around it is important.
So, and where would you say you get most of your information about religion from?
All sorts of good books are available.
Okay.
They tend to be the anti-religious. Well, it's in my bookshelf perhaps, but at least it helps educate oneself.
Right. Anyone else put the other box on? Tell us about another source. Family and friends, 6%. School religious education, 6%. That's interesting. That's quite low, isn't it? Although maybe it's because school and education was a long time ago for some of us. Anyone want to say anything about the family and friends element of what that's led them, where they get their information from family and friends? Anyone want to push that button? Okay, let's go to the next question, which is, what percentage of the world's population describe themselves as religious? And your options are 15%, 25%, 50%, 66%, or 85%. So we'll just give you time to answer that question. This is really interesting. When my brother gave me a lift to the station this morning, I tried this out on him. And he said 50%. And he was very surprised when I told him the answer, which is 85%. Is anyone surprised by that it's so high?
Can I make a comment?
Yes, you may.
I'm not surprised, because I think when you do any of these studies, the issue is that where you get your information from. So the recent census that was done in 2021 of the British public, the largest group, not a majority, but the largest group, defined themselves as non-religious. So always with all these vox pop type things, or with all of these research, it's always conditioned by the issues that researchers use by. And I don't know the validity of that, other than the fact that people fill this in who are coming here. And that might well, of course, be people who are particularly interested from a religious perspective. So can I suggest it's a dubious statistic?
I don't know if you can. Pauline, can he?
I agree with you, of course, how we, whoever is collecting the data. This was collected in 2022 by the World Population Review, which is a bona fide organisation that does these types of things. I think this question for me about sometimes when you identify and people say, I'm religious, well, what do you mean by religious? Because that can mean quite different things, actually. Does it mean that you're a member of a church or a mosque or a Hindu temple? Or does it mean, well, I am religious, but I don't actually affiliate to anybody? So I think it's quite a complex thing, and I don't know how they defined this. I did have a look again this morning, and I couldn't see actually how they probably didn't give a definition.
I think maybe it's the world's population. I mean, it just reminds us that we're in a very particular Western bubble here, and that most of the world is more religious than we are. I mean, I don't know, Dominic, the average Anglican certainly is young, black, female, and lives in Africa, doesn't she?
That's absolutely correct.
I mean, for the census in the UK, I think 37% said they were non-religious, 42% Christian. So that's a declining number. It was down 13% from the previous census. So that might lead to another question about, the place of religious leaders in our national and public life. Next question. Should there be religious leaders in the House of Lords? This is a yes or no. No wrong or right answer. I can see a head nodding there.
It's like Brexit all over.
Oh, it really is, isn't it? Very split. Okay, let's have a couple of. Well, before we go to the York Humanist in the yellow T-shirt, let's just ask Rachael. What do you think about this?
I mean, I think we've got to see real reform in the House of Lords, and I support an elected second chamber. But what I would say around that, it's really important that we have got faith leaders being able to speak into Parliament and politicians. And I greatly value those that support us in Parliament because it helps clarify many of the debates we have, which are complex, particularly on global affairs, but also as we work through many of the challenges we're trying to deal with here at home as well.
Would you go for a fully elected House of Lords then?
I personally would.
Right. You might not get many religious people in there. I suppose that's the danger, isn't it? They'd have to stand. You'd been encouraging them to stand.
They would have to stand for office, and I would want to see that nobody is barred from standing for office because of their faith or being a religious leader.
Dominic, I suppose there are religious leaders, and there are religious leaders in the House of Lords, who are there out of merit, I suppose. And then you've got 26 purple shirts in the House of Lords who are there simply because they are bishops. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I think when we're talking about the House of Lords, I suspect probably pretty much everyone in this tent and attending the whole event would probably say if we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't design anything about the House of Lords like it is. We're dealing with a complex history that I think for successive governments of different points of view, the complexities of dealing with it in a major way always get it relegated to the back of the queue because there are more important things to do. So if I was designing a second chamber from scratch, I wouldn't have the arrogance to say the 26 most senior members of the Church of England get in and nobody else does, simply ex officio. But I noticed that when Saida Wassi was asked about this in this very tent yesterday evening, she is a strong supporter of the presence of the Anglican bishops because at the moment it does at least guarantee that there is some faith lens applied to the discussions in the House of Lords. And she made the point that you have got all sorts of very capable leading figures in the Lords from all walks of life. And it does seem to me that it's a good thing that that includes religion. It's a historical embarrassment, I think, in some ways, that the only defined religious members of the Lords are the 26 Anglican bishops. And I think the Church of England would be as happy to join in discussions about reform as would anybody else. Although I would say that if you need a certain volume to be able to do it. There was a proposal a few years ago that number should be cut down to 12. which would actually be unworkable for the bishops, because they'd either just have to not bother, or they'd have to give so much of their time to it, they couldn't do their day job. So it's a complicated thing. But we're dealing with a historical legacy that it's more complicated to address properly than just to, let roll, I think.
Let's hear from a couple of people. Microphone to the lady in the yellow T-shirt, please. And then is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this? We'll go to that, and then we'll see where we're up to.
Thank you. Sorry, I actually wanted to comment on the previous question about people who identify as religious, and I think it was just very present in my mind that I've just come back from Malaysia, where it's actually a hanging offence to declare yourself as non-religious. So I think you have to bear in mind the social and political structures of other countries in how people define themselves. So that question is a very bland and kind of complicated question.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Dawson. I'm from York St John University. Just on the House of Lords, often debates and discussions about it talk about kind of different forms of organisation, etc. But I'd just like to kind of add to the debate about the fruit of what happens. So in defence of the bishops in the House of Lords, I would say just look to what they have brought to the debate. And compared to, as Saida talked about yesterday, compared to the Commons, the quality of debate in the Lords is much better. There's a lot of very ill thought out, clumsy legislation is initiated from the Commons, which the Lords manages to add, a lot of good advice, and in some cases manages to stop often quite ignorant actions which are initiated by from the Commons. And so I would say, the proof is in the pudding. And if we look at, contribution from debate, the bishops have given very good contributions, not least on the issue of immigration, where there's a great deal of ignorance comes from the Commons, and which is balanced by much more positive statements from the Commons, and I would speak in favour of the bishops of the input that they've given. I agree on the issue regarding other faiths, that there does need to be reform so we can have, if you like, sort of official voices of other faiths other than Christianity. Yeah.
Anyone else want to, on the floor, comment on the Lords?
Sorry, thank you. Hi, I'm Kofi. I'm actually supposed to be working. I'm part of Radix Big Tent, but I thought I'd interject because I come from a really religious background. The point that was just made by Martin from York St John's, it was interesting that you stated that because the Lords are swaying a certain way in terms of the political narrative, they are really good for the political narrative. But on the other hand, should they go against the person's political opinion, would you then say this the same thing? So I think we need to view the Lords as separate from the current political climate and only like them when they're doing things we like, and just see them as the institutional component of the British system. The king is in church, parliament, law, and all of that, and the church is a part of the British system. So that is how we should view them, rather than just our allies. When the Commons are going nuts, they can balance things out for us.
I suppose you might get a difference between what the bishops themselves think. I don't know if the bishops' bench is ever divided on things.
The House of Bishops is extremely broad in its range of opinions and often divided within itself, although it attempts not to show it to the public, but it's manifestly true.
Pauline?
Just a quick comment there, because that raises the issue about understanding religion. Religions are not monolithic. So people who represent, for example, the bishops, or there's a couple of, the chief rabbis in there and whoever else, basically, they don't always speak for me as a Jew, for example, because religion is diverse, and that's what we must understand. And I think that's part of the understanding process.
Thank you. Colin?
Yeah, it's the diversity point that I wanted to pick up on too. every piece of decent sanity that comes out of the House of Lords from bishops or from anybody else, thank you. Really appreciate it for their views. Now, obviously, what I define as decency and sanity might differ from other people, but there have been some excellent contributions from religious people in the House of Lords. That's not my point, though. My point is that why has, and we know the answer is an historical reason, social historical reason, why are they there in the first place? And what about a modern country that we'd like to try to create? I'm a secularist. I believe that religion is entirely up to the individual, and if the individuals wish to organise together, to come together to practice their religion, that's absolutely fine by me. Would never campaign or argue against religious people from that perspective. But to run the state, the House of Lords, one of the key components of what makes our country purportedly a democracy, one where a particular faith has a particular privilege. Now, there are many religious people in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Rachael here in our panel is one of them. Religion can be represented through the individual and your own views as been elected, not because of some obscure ancient historic tradition that people are too frightened to untangle.
Thank you. We'll leave that one there for now. We can come back to other comments on it at the end if we've got time. Let's just go to our next question. Should religious education be compulsory in schools? Yes, 54%. No, 42%. Don't know, 4%. I mean, Pauline, would you just start by explaining actually what the position is as regards compulsion and religious education, how it works in the primary system, in the secondary system, just briefly?
Okay, well, one of the things, religious education has to be taught, but around about 2010, the government of the day decided that no longer would people training to be primary teachers be allowed to specialise. And therefore, it means that sometimes it's very difficult to find people within the school, primary school, who actually have really studied religion and how they're going to teach it. So in some schools, it is the case, I understand, that they don't actually always have a religious education course, but it's packaged in topics like history or literature or geography. Now that, to me, seems to be a problem. At secondary level, it's very different, of course, because you can train to be a secondary teacher and you train to be an RE specialist. And therefore, you have people who have studied religions of the world and they are teaching those whole courses, usually religion, philosophy and ethics type stuff. So that's the situation.
I'm interested that you think it's a problem because, I mean, if we're saying that it's important to understand religion in order to understand life and the world, then that's sort of across the curriculum approach where we look at religion through a historical lens, geographical or whatever, seems to me quite a sensible way of doing it if it's done properly.
But that's the issue, isn't it? Some people, like a history teacher says, well, I don't know anything about Islam. And, you know, I can tell you there were battles and goodness knows what. But one of the missing things I understand from people who work in the primary sector is basically they don't have the time to teach about the fundamental beliefs and practices of these different religions.
That happens at secondary school?
Yes. Well, it's a bit late then, though, isn't it? Sorry.
Okay. Rachael, have you got any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally essential that different religions are taught to people right through their education. If we're going to understand the world around us, how it works and how society and communities work, we've got to understand one another and we've got to understand the faith systems of the world. So absolutely crucial. Here in York, we've got a fantastic organisation called Yo-Yo, which goes into all of the primary schools, people with lived experience of the Christian faith, and goes and shares their faith with young people in the same way that the mosque has relationships with some of the schools. And I think people who live out their faith, sharing that with people, can then speak very much about their experience of faith, because faith isn't necessary, and certainly not for me, about a set of rules and understanding those rules. It's about a living relationship and experience. And as a result of that, it's really important, I think, to understand how that influences life, society, community, and world, and how that interacts into the motivations of people across the community. So I would say absolutely crucial.
I think one of the when my children were doing religious studies at secondary school, it was sort of, here are 5 or 6 main religious traditions in the UK. Here's what they believe. Here's what they do. Here are their main festivals, and it was made religion come about as alive as a, I don't know, dormouse. I mean, I just felt so disappointed in what was being communicated to them about religion. Colin, do you want to comment on that, or do you want to make another point?
No, I want to make... Sorry, speak to the microphone then. I want to make a point on this general subject, which is related to what you've just said, because interest in education is key to learning, of course. When I first bumped into Rosie when we came in this morning, she said, "How do you want to be introduced?" And I came out with 2 answers. One, I'm Daniel's in the Lion's Den, which she introduced me as. But the other thing that I thought of, which was that I was the ultimate heretic. But luckily, I live in a way, in a place now where I'm not going to be tortured to death, as was suggested, if I might, to give my views otherwise. In relation to this question, then the issue for me is that the heresy is that religious education in schools needs to be replaced. It needs to be replaced by 2 other subjects. One is worldviews. How do people around the world and around this country come to their understanding about their sense of self, their sense of where they are and who they are in the world, and how can they use that sense of self in order to be able to give them a personal moralistic orientation? The second thing they need to do is related to what I've just said. We need to introduce critical thinking, the ability for people to listen, to understand, to question, to weigh up evidence in relation to any religion that might exist in our country or in other countries, and to any sense of what they themselves believe in. It was through that practice that I became a humanist, being able to do that and find that faith for me wasn't something that worked, except faith in humanity, which does work for me.
Can I ask you, Colin? So underneath worldviews, you've got lots of different possibilities, one of which is religious and subsections of religious. What do you call the other? What are the other worldviews? I mean, do you say it's a humanist worldview, it's an atheist worldview, or is there something else that you're putting in there?
Well, I find that, when I listen to the Dean and when I listen to other people, there's a lot of religious morality that I identify with and totally support. So that, in a sense, is a worldview. We have a moral view which comes out of our society and is seen within our religion. So if you compare the moral view of Christianity in this country, say related to gay people, and compare it to some countries in Africa, you'll see that, and as the Dean himself pointed out, there's a pluralism of different types of views. So by worldviews, I mean things that reflect our society and the way that we think and the way we operate. And I would include Judaism and Islam and all the other religions in that, and non-religions too. An understanding of our world from that moral perspective.
Right. So you're not sort of suggesting that everybody's categorised under a particular worldview. It's a sort of it's within the... Yeah, I think I understand what you
help people think to make themselves feel better about themselves. Yeah. Give them orientation in life.
Right, now this question about religious education being compulsory, of course, a third of our state schools are religious schools, I believe. So most of those will be Church of England schools still. So what sort of religious education should a church school be given? How will that be different from in a state school, a normal state school, as it were?
I'm not entirely sure that it should be. Curriculum is a matter for government at the end of the day, and my 2 sons go to one of the Church of England secondary schools in the city, and they pursue a religious education syllabus that I suspect is pursued across all the schools in York. The school also has, I would say, quite a tangible Christian ethos, that's a different matter.
Right. It's also education, though, isn't it? I mean, by ethos, there's also an attempt at educating, isn't there? I mean, it's in the broader sense, I guess.
Well, in the broader sense, yes, but there is not in a proselytizing manner, I think, is what my comeback would be. And I think there is a significant difference between curriculum and ethos, and I think that's important. And I would be very concerned at schools that have a religious tradition behind their governance that go beyond curriculum to be heavy-handed about a particular view, because I don't think that that's a healthy way of forming young minds. And in the main, it's certainly not the practice in Church of England schools.
Pauline?
Yes, I was just thinking when you were saying what you were saying. Of course, there are some religious schools of other faith traditions in this country that do not teach about other religions. And there's a whole problem for me with that, because then the children are being totally educated, isolated from not learning with children of no faith or other faiths. And I have to be careful, but I get very antagonistic about those things, because that is not how I think religious schools should behave, and neither should it be the way in which any religious education is taught. It can't be just about one religion or two religions. I know you can't teach every religion in the world, but it does have to have a good spread as well.
Rachel, I mean, is this something that gets discussed in the Commons very much, about the nature of religious schools as opposed to religious education?
It doesn't really. I mean, I think there's been one or two debates since I've been in Parliament for about 8 years, so probably not enough. And the role of faith kind of education and across society isn't discussed enough in the Commons. Very rarely is there a debate which is dedicated to such an issue. And I think there should be a greater emphasis, because it obviously impacts on so many aspects of each of our lives, that if we don't have that discussion, it's almost like don't talk about religion kind of environment. And I think it's really important that we push through that and create those spaces to have those discussions, because outside of the main chamber, a lot of people are talking about their faith journeys with one another, about how they navigate them kind of through the various situations and challenges which they're dealing with as politicians. So it plays a very large role in the life of politicians, of faith or of no faith, but also it's a discussion we know happens right across our communities and society too. So it's really important that we do reflect that in the debates and discussions and questions that we have in the House.
I mean, it's interesting, Dominic, you were saying earlier that, you know, if we're going back to the beginning, we wouldn't have the current House of Lords in the way that it is now. And I think probably the same is true of the education system. I mean, it's a sort of historic fact that, you know, education was the province of the church for a long time. But that is a problem, isn't it, Colin, now that almost the right to a religious school kind of does create problems where you only have children of one particular faith or denomination in one school, and the sort of narrowness, the danger of the narrowness of that curriculum. Is there anything that can be done about that?
Well, unfortunately, we're not in a country that's particularly revolutionary. Our change is very slow and incremental, and eventually we get there, but whilst everybody else is far, far ahead of us. So can anything be done about it? Yes, of course it can. We need to create ourselves a secular society that will put all religions and religious views and all non-religious views on an equal par. And until we grip that and take that sensibly, the anachronisms that you were referring to, Pauline, are going to occur. Yes, we can, but do we have the will? And I think one of the give a bit of humanism here, but one of the joys of humanism is that we represent a group of people who are not just non-religious, but are also progressive in terms of the types of issues that we've been talking about. So find the will, and there's a way.
Right, let's go to the next question. How important do you think faith groups are in social provision in the UK? Social care, volunteering, food banks. Let's have a look at that. Right, quite... OK, this is interesting. Moderately important, 31%. Less important than non-faith groups, 23%. Very important, 38%. Not at all important, 8%. Anyone want to speak on that?
I used to be an anti-theist, and now I've been on a bit of a spiritual journey, and now I'm merely an atheist. And one of the things that's helped me along that journey, I chair the High Street Task Force, is actually understanding better the role that faith groups play in civic society and in placemaking and being, you know, the glue that makes so many things happen. So I think they're hugely important.
Can I just check? Did you push the 8% button?
No.
All right. I was looking for whoever pushed the 8%. Did anyone push the 8% button and would like to say why they pushed the 8% button? Because that's what I'm interested in why somebody might not think that the faith groups are important in providing that social care and so on. No? Yes. So your point is the opposite of that, really?
Yeah. But as an atheist, I see their values. I'm chapeau to a degree.
I made the journey from atheism to humanism. Good luck with that one.
But one thing, if I may, I think the question is, do we understand religion and does it matter? Yes, it matters hugely. I think we all recognise that. Do we understand the role religion plays? I'm not so sure about it. I'm not sure the average person in the street would understand that there are bishops in the House of Lords. I don't think the average person in the street challenges whether their kids go to a faith school or not. The only time it reaches sentience is whether or not they can gerrymander their kids getting into school by turning up on a Sunday when they don't really believe in it. So I think there's a really healthy debate to be had about a positive role for religion in civic society. But I think religion's got to lose some of its position of privilege, House of Lords, embedded in education, to actually make its case. And I think it has a really strong case in society, but it's not being made, and it gets lost in the kind of questions that we're discussing today.
Rachel, can I ask you about the role of faith groups in the social provision in the UK? I mean, in York, for instance, in your patch, where would York be without the involvement of the faith sector?
I have to say that I think there's probably around 33 plus different forms of social action which has come out of just the churches here in York, and I know the mosque also contributes. I know the York Jewish community contribute, and I know we've got the Interfaith Forum here in York as well. And if you look at everything from feeding people who are hungry, befriending people who are lonely, being there, providing support in the community, being in the schools, being across so many different areas of social action, people motivated by their faith, you know, that is what is drawing people out, because in their faith, believing in a God of restoration that's wanting to restore our community, societies and people, being there as kind of representing that, but also serving a God who gives so much, and to being able to provide support for people. So it's really important, the faith element of that service, and never should that be taken away from what actually happens across the city.
Is there anyone who thinks that it's less important than non-faith groups who would like to speak?
Thank you. Sorry, it's Kate here again from your.
Don't apologise.
Right. I did actually press that it's very important, but I think that's again partly because of the way information is collected, because faith groups have a big advantage over most non-faith groups in that they are organised. They have buildings that they can operate services out of. They have organisations that are visible in the public sphere. And I think as humanists, a lot of us are very charitable people, volunteer in different ways, but that is hidden because we're not supported by an organisational structure.
And a lot of the food banks and so on that come out of, say, church buildings will have people of no faith sort of joining in. So there's a sort of cooperation thing. There is an infrastructure thing as well as a sort of motivation thing from the point of view of faith. Of course, humanists have their motivation for volunteering and for helping. I mean, I suppose that the danger, isn't it, possibly, Rachel, is that the government, which may not want to spend as much money on welfare as it should, can sort of say, well, come on, faith groups, it's up to you. I mean, how should this balance work between faith groups providing and the state providing?
Well, I would say it's absolutely crucial that the state provides that safety net across society, and that's about the redistribution of the resource that it's got. And of course, we're not seeing that being done well at the moment, but the church very much in the city stepped in 2010 because that provision was taken away. Yes, having the infrastructure, but also people wanting to see, when I talk about a God of restoration, but people wanting to see the restoration in people's lives as well, and very much being part of that, because it's not just about the doing too, because that doesn't dignify an individual, but I think through faith, dignifying the individual is really important in that situation, because if you have no means yourself in that situation, say around food, you don't want to just be given to, you want to be part of. And I've seen that demonstrated so powerfully in the food banks across York.
Anything to add to that, Dominic?
I don't really think so. No, I think I'd absolutely endorse what Rachel just said.
Pauline?
I just wanted to say, of course, I support that. It's very important for these faith groups. But also, I think one thing perhaps that we are not so good at in this country as faith groups is actually, do the social provision and, help these people. But what are we doing actually to politically challenge the government and its structures and its policies? Now, I know there are individuals, and there have been individual religious leaders and individuals within faith communities that I often work across with non-faith groups and not, in different types of political, trying to challenge government. But it seems to me it's not sustained and it's not explicit enough.
Well, maybe that's because there's, they're not a block, are they? As you said, the bishops will have different opinions, perhaps even on the extent to which the church should be.
But I'm not talking about bishops. I'm talking about people in their communities, in their churches, their mosques, their synagogues, their mandirs and places like this. So what the hell is going on?
What do you think's going on?
Well, I think sometimes it's because, sometimes some of it is because there's not this type of leadership from the religious leaders in encouraging what happened to the prophetic tradition, for example, in Judaism, in Christianity, and Islam. So that would be one of the main reasons, I think.
Okay, right. Well, talking of the prophetic tradition, next question. Which of these statements most closely reflects your view on whether political leaders should use religion to underpin their political platforms? So 48% is entirely up to them. 41% never. Politics and religion should be completely separate. 7% only if they're strongly religious themselves. And 4% a lot. Rachael, is it entirely up to political leaders how much they use their religion to underpin their political platforms?
What I would say is that I cannot separate out myself into the political Rachael and the Christian Rachael, that I am Rachael, and that is the package that you have. My faith really influences my politics, and my politics are very much part of my faith. So it comes as a package, and people can't come along and say, I want this bit of you and that bit of you, but not that bit and that bit, because that's not who I am. And that forever people are trying to change you and trying to shape you into kind of believing this a little bit less and doing this a little bit more. But I can't change, because that is fundamentally who I am. And I think something I take very much at the heart of the way that I look at faith is that we shouldn't judge others, and yet people are quite prepared to judge you because they put a badge on you which says, you should or you shouldn't. think certain things or act in a certain way. But I think as a Christian, it is a representative part of our society, as we've already heard, part of our world. And I will hold views on issues and I will speak to those views. And I am not ashamed of that. And I shouldn't be judged for that. It should be embraced as much as everybody else's views should be embraced and weighed carefully within the wider political debate.
What if your views, from prompted by your religion, caused you to come into conflict with the party line on something?
And it has, and I've gone and explained why that is.
Just tell us what that was.
Central to my faith. So there's issues around, we've had votes in Parliament around abortion. That is an issue which I believe that life does begin at conception. And I believe that, that is important. I respect people that don't share that view, but that's fundamental in my faith in God and his creation. And as a result, I've talked to the party, and the party is absolutely 100% behind me in respecting the fact that I have a right to be able to express that view, because they recognise that as a party they want to represent people who are Christians too and who hold that view. So other people have completely different views, and that's absolutely fine. But
is it fine? I'm just thinking about the Kate Forbes situation. I mean, if you wanted to stand for party leader, you'd probably come unstuck, wouldn't you?
Well, Kate had a very strong vote still, and I think we've got to look at that. She stood on a platform, but I think what Kate demonstrated is that there's far more respect for somebody that actually speaks of who they are, as opposed to people that try and hide from part of who they are and are dishonest about that. So I think having that honesty is really important.
Dominic, you've spent some time in the States. You were in Chicago for a while. So, I mean, there's another way in which political leaders might use religion to underpin their political platforms. And they might not be as honourable as some sort of genuine convictions held. I'm just wondering what your reflections on that are. I mean, I suppose the appealing to religion as a way of bolstering your base, and I don't think I need to mention names, but he's got orange hair and an orange face.
Well, it is extraordinary how the man with the orange hair and the orange face won the support both of the vast majority of very conservative, fundamentalist, right-wing Christians, given that his personal lifestyle is a million miles away from just about every value that they champion very loudly. He also, quite incredibly, one of the things which was really shocking for me, when it finally became clear that Biden had won the election in a manner that couldn't be contested, which was in early December, the Roman Catholic Bishops' Conference, so we're looking at a group of people who are not the kind of fundamentalist evangelicals predominantly in the south of America, the Roman Catholic Bishops' Conference, having just had, only for the second time in history, a practicing Roman Catholic elected as the President of the United States, basically put out a statement saying, oh, well, I suppose this might be okay, but you'd better behave. They should have been cheering that they'd got their own guy coming into the White House. The problem, I would say, is not religion, it's fundamentalism. And we are living in an age where fundamentalism, whether it is religious fundamentalism or political fundamentalism or economic fundamentalism or many other forms of fundamentalism is dominating the world in a manner which is frightening and dangerous. Its impact in the political life of the United States is very, very clear, and I hope it doesn't become the case in the political life of this country.
Do you think it's going that way?
Yes, I think the growth of fundamentalism is a very serious problem across the world, including the developed Western so-called civilized world. Frankly, I think much of what we have seen around the Brexit vote and the fallout from it is to do with areas of fundamentalism. I think it's a real and live danger. Could I also very quickly say, as somebody who gets to speak to the public, not on a political platform, but in a pulpit, just like Rachael, they don't get only a little bit of me. In the House of Commons, they don't just get the political Rachael, they get the whole Rachael, which of course is just the same for ministers of religion. My politics are informed by my faith and inform how I preach in a pulpit in just the same way that I think they inform how Rachael speaks in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Colin.
At the risk of equanimity bursting out now, I just totally agree with what you both have said, and I share your analysis and your understanding. I do think the right thing is that whatever your makeup, whether it be religious, non-religious, atheist, agnostic, humanist, whatever it may be, then if you have political views and you stand for election in any political party and you get elected, that is good enough for me. Whatever your views are, people have backed them up. The problem lies with when you trade on it. It's with fundamentalism that Dominic has just referred to. It's where people use, and in my view, abuse their religious heritage or their religious labelling. So, as you have pointed out, Dominic, the man with the orange hair has broken all of the things that he's supposed to stand for. But then, of course, that isn't true. That's false news, isn't it? That's lies that people like me are telling, when in reality he is almost his own Messiah. So the question, again, some of the questions are not quite presented correctly. If your answer is it's entirely up to them, and you will take your religious or your non-religious self seriously and present yourself to the public for the election, I would vote for that. If it is never should be for people who abuse and trade on their religious or their non-religious views, whether they be political or, as we are seeing these days, narcissistic, then I would definitely vote never.
Thank you. And I'm just going to get the answers to the last question up here so that you can see them, because it's quite interesting. This is about the countries and matching to their different traditions. Yes, Sudan is indeed Sunni Muslim. Nigeria, Christian. It says here Sunni Muslim as well, but
it's split pretty evenly.
North and south.
Yeah.
Right, Nigeria, Sunni Muslim in the. Is it North and Catholic in the South, or is it the other way around? Have I got it the wrong way around?
I think just Islam is generally to the north in Africa, and Christianity to the south.
Right. France, yes. It's Catholic, USA, Christian, yes, and Northern Ireland. Protestant still, but maybe not for that much longer if the demographics go the way they're going. Now, we've got just about 3 minutes left, 4 of you. Okay, so what is it? You can change the question if you want and answer another one, which you can make up now. But okay, so in our understanding of religion, what is it that you think is the most important thing to understand about religion? Pauline.
The most important thing is to understand that all religions have diverse views and diverse interpretations of sacred text, and some of us have thrown out some of those sacred texts within our own traditions. So I think that, but can I just add to that? It's also important to actually recognize that religions have both negative and positive capacities to build peace, contribute to peace and social justice. And it's not that one religion is particularly more violent than another.
Dominic.
I think kind of my final remark in the direction of where all this has been going is that people need to remember that for many religious people, the motivation that comes out of religion is, particularly if push comes to shove, extremely powerful, which is why religious literacy is so important in the age in which we live.
Colin?
2 or 3 quick points. I will be brief with all of them. Firstly, what we need to do is disentangle the link that there is between religion and politics. I do think there are links, but I think when we couple them together, we can get problems. And I think Rachael, for example, as in her work as an MP, is doing her best to master that. Second thing is humanists are organising a debate on assisted dying on the 25th of July at the Quaker Meeting Hall. If anyone is interested in that, it is being chaired by the Lord Mayor of York, and there is an ex-MP, John, who is proposing the liberalisation of the law, and then there's the medical director of St Leonard's Hospice who is opposing. And my final comment is about, thank goodness that Big Tent and other people, including the church, are promoting serious discussion and promoting the type of interactions that have been enjoyed here. We need our society to do more of that, and I implore everybody to put their initiative and their efforts to get people thinking and get people talking, and let's stop the absenteeism for the running of our country.
Rachael.
We are all trying to find our way through this very messy and broken world. And for many of us, we will see that path of faith is a way of bringing that healing and restoration to the planet and to people's lives. And that's really important to us. And other people are on that journey somewhere else. And I think it's really important that we listen to each other, we learn from each other, we don't judge one another on that place, and that we reach out to each other and try and learn exactly our path through.
Well, thank you. Thank you to you all for attending, and thank you so much to my panel. Let's give us all a great round of applause. Thank you.